Okay, I think it's 11:10. So we have our next session starting, and this is a plenary session. So we all here gathered in room one. And it is my pleasure to introduce our plenary presenter, someone who has spent decades not just studying the intersection of East and West by living it. Dr. Jeffrey Rubin is a practicing analyst, psychoanalyst in New York City, a teacher at the Object Relation Institute, the American Institute of Psychoanalysis, and C.G. Jung Institute of New York, and the author of 8 books exploring the frontiers of psychotherapy, meditation, and what it means to truly flourish. Dr. Rubin is also a psychohistorian and psychobiographer, someone who brings the lens of depth psychology to history and to the lives of remarkable individuals, illuminating not just the inner world of the consulting room, but the larger human story. What sets Jeffrey apart is that he doesn't preach integration, he embodies it. His daily life reflects the same synthesis he brings to his clinical work, a genuine weaving together of Western psychoanalytic depth and Eastern contemplative wisdom lived from the inside out. That approach caught the attention of New York Times Magazine, which featured his pioneering work as, and I love this phrase, an enlightenment therapy. The heart of everything Jeffrey does is a deep respect for the full human condition, drawing on psychoanalysis, history, art, literature, and philosophy to help people to not just heal, but truly come alive. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeffrey Rubin.
Thank you so much, Ina, and the IPHA for inviting me to speak with you today about where hope lies, breaking the cycle of violence from within. Violence, physical, verbal, and emotional, assaults and demoralizes us. Hope, quiet, subtle, relentless, also finds us. We see the violence everywhere, in political polarization that no longer seeks to understand, only to defeat, in the speed with which disagreement turns into contempt, in the ways people withdraw, harden, or strike out when they feel unseen or threatened. We know a great deal about what is going wrong. We know less about something equally important, where hope actually lies. Not hope as optimism, not hope as reassurance, and not hope as a denial of how serious our situation is, but hope as something more demanding, the capacity to remain present to what's painful, to understand it, and to respond in ways that do not reproduce it. In my clinical work over several decades, I've repeatedly encountered a troubling pattern. What presents as hatred toward others or toward oneself often conceals something far more vulnerable beneath it, experiences of humiliation, invisibility, fear, or despair that have found no place to be known or shared. When these experiences remain unrecognized, they do not simply disappear, they tend to harden into grievance, contempt, into the wish to dominate or diminish others, or into a withdrawal from life itself. This is one of the ways cycles of violence are sustained, not only in societies, but within families, relationships, and individual lives. If that's the problem, then the question becomes, what interrupts this pattern? Where does hope find a foothold in a life or a world shaped by invisibility and degradation? I want to suggest that hope does not lie in eliminating suffering. That's not within our control. Hope lies in something both more modest and more demanding, the human capacity to transform suffering rather than transmit it. In today's talk, I want to explore that capacity through three very different individuals: James Baldwin, George Atwood, and Anton Chekhov. Each of them began in circumstances marked by hardship, loss, or profound psychological challenge. Each of them had reason to become hardened, embittered, or withdrawn. And each, in a different way, did something else. Baldwin transformed humiliation and exclusion into moral witness and a fierce, unsentimental form of love. Atwood transformed devastating loss and the absence of an emotional home into a lifelong commitment to understanding others, what he called, and I quote, the incomparable power of human understanding, end of quote, and quote, leaving no one behind. Chekhov, who described his childhood as feeling like that of a, quote, little convict, end of quote, and who spent his adult life, quote, squeezing the slave out of himself drop by drop, end of quote, refused to make degradation the center of his life. He transformed anguish into a way of seeing human beings that was lucid without being contemptuous, and into a practice of benevolence expressed not in sentiment, but in deeds. These are not stories of optimism. They're examples of something rarer: the capacity to remain psychologically and morally alive in the presence of pain. If we're to break cycles of violence in our culture and in ourselves, this capacity is not optional, it's essential, and it is learnable. We know this because Baldwin, Atwood, and Chekhov were not born with it. Each of them worked toward it against the undertow of their own histories. That is what makes their example not merely inspiring, but instructive. This is the territory we will explore together today. James Baldwin grew up in a world that had decided, before he drew breath, what he was and what he was worth. He was black, poor, gay, and the stepson of a man so consumed by bitterness and fear that he could not reach his own children. In fact, he crushed them. Baldwin grew up in Harlem amid what he called muggings, stabbings, shootings, assaults, gang wars, and the daily grinding humiliation of racist America. The Kerner Commission would later describe that America as, quote, two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Baldwin lived that division from the inside from childhood. He had every reason to hate, and he did hate. He was honest enough to say so. I hated and feared the world, he wrote. But Baldwin saw something that changed everything. He saw that the hatred was not only a response to what had been done to him, it was doing something to him. And I quote, my life, my real life was in danger, Baldwin wrote, and not from anything other people might do, but from the hatred I carried in my own heart. This is the first and most important of Baldwin's insights, that hatred is not a wound that the hater inflicts on himself. That hatred is a wound that the hater inflicts on himself. It destroys the one who carries it. Baldwin had watched it destroy his father. Baldwin recognized it in himself. And he made a choice, not a single dramatic choice, but a sustained, daily, costly discipline to refuse hate. The moment that crystallized this refusal came on the night of Baldwin's father's funeral in 1943 in Harlem, which was also Baldwin's 19th birthday, as riots broke out across Harlem. Standing at his father's graveside, Baldwin reached what he later described as a double recognition, stated with what I can only call terrible clarity. And I quote, it began to seem that one would have to hold in the mind forever two ideas which seemed to be in opposition. The first idea was acceptance, the acceptance totally without rancor of life as it is and men as they are. But this did not mean that one could be complacent, For the second idea, Baldwin wrote, was of equal power, that one must never in one's own life accept these injustices as commonplace, but must fight them with all one's strength. End of quote. Face the world as it is and fight it with everything you have, both simultaneously, without letting either cancel the other. That's the fork in the road Baldwin chose, and it required something he named precisely. And I quote, "It demands great spiritual resilience not to hate the hater whose foot is on your neck, and an even greater miracle of perception and charity not to teach your child to hate." Notice what Baldwin's saying here and what he is not saying. He's not asking for forgiveness. He is not counseling passivity. He is not pretending the boot is not on his neck. He sees it clearly. He names it with fury and precision. But he refuses to let hatred be his response because he understands something most of us resist knowing, that hatred forecloses the very humanity it needs to restore. When we dehumanize the oppressor, reduce him or her to their cruelty, blindness, fear, we mirror back the very gesture that injured us. We become in that moment what wounded us. That's not idealism, it's psychological necessity. Baldwin's capacity to see the humanity beneath the cruelty of his oppressors, to understand the fear and blindness that sustain racism, was not generosity towards them. It was an act of self-preservation. It was how he kept his own soul intact. And it is, he believed, the only way a fractured world heals, because dehumanization on any side forecloses the possibility of repair. Hatred for Baldwin was a failure of imagination. His answer to humiliation was to enlarge his imagination rather than narrow it, to insist on complexity, to pursue understanding, to refuse the consolations of contempt. Out of that refusal, Baldwin fashioned something rare, a form of moral witness that could hold rage and love simultaneously, that could name America's lies without giving up on America's potential humanity, that could confront injustice without reproducing it. Baldwin defeated the world's intentions for him, not by escaping them, but by going through them and coming out the other side with his humanity enlarged rather than diminished. That's Baldwin's pathway to hope and is available to anyone willing to pay its price. George Atwood has spent more than 50 years doing something that's rare in our world and maybe rare in our field. He goes into hell with people, not metaphorically, not from a safe clinical distance, but wholeheartedly into psychosis, annihilation, despair, the darkest and most terrifying regions of human experience, with what he has called, quote, the incomparable power of human understanding as his only instrument. He is, in the language I want to use today, a Virgil for our time. I know something about this personally. When I first read Dante's Divine Comedy and encountered Virgil accompanying Dante into the underworld, I recognized something I had lived with George Atwood. He had been that kind of companion to me, willing to go into the darkest places without flinching or looking away. But to understand what made him that kind of companion and what it cost him, we have to go back to the beginning. George was 8 years old when his mother died suddenly of a malignant brain tumor. She was, in his words, the beating heart of our family. End of quote. A deeply loving presence around whom his world was organized. Her death shattered that world. He felt, he later wrote, quote, the world ending. What followed was not one trauma, but three in rapid succession. The first was the loss itself of his mother, devastating, irreversible, the sudden absence of the person who mattered most. The second was what George called a, quote, epistemological trauma, end of quote. His father and a minister reassured him that his mother would return, that they would be reunited. His father and minister denied what had happened, deeply invalidating George's experience and undermining George's sense of reality. The third, perhaps the most lasting trauma, was the absence of any emotional home for his grief. Everyone in his family collapsed inward. There was nowhere for his feelings to go, no one to go into hell with him. 3 days after his mother died, George found his father standing silently, tears streaming down his face. George, 8 years old, put his arm around his father and said, "It's all right, Dad. We're going to be okay." He had already begun, he later recognized, to adopt the nurturing, comforting role that had been the hallmark of his mother's personality, continuing her presence in a world from which she had vanished. That gesture, an 8-year-old comforting his grieving father, contains the whole of George Atwood's life and work. It's where his vocation was born, and it is where his cage was built. He became Virgil to others, going wholeheartedly into their emotional underworlds, places no one had ever ventured, and found in that accompaniment both a mission and a priceless link to his loving mother. Deep devotion to wounded and lost souls was a way of keeping her present in his world. Leaving no one behind became the animating principle of his clinical work, his theoretical innovations, and his daily life. But the gift was also a cage. Gradually over time, in small steps, I found myself in a caregiving role which provided a taste of vital connection, he told me. It was also my downfall. I felt I had a mission which got stronger as I got older. The needs of others took precedence over his own. His first marriage, he told me, was a caretaking operation. I sacrificed myself so she wouldn't feel deserted. He once dreamt of himself in a cage hanging from a tree, imprisoned by the very identification with his mother's loving kindness that had sustained him. The unseen boy, he called himself in one of our conversations, the boy whose hell no one had entered, whose grief had found no home. I want to be there for other people, he told me, the way no one was there for me. This is the hidden cost of benevolence when it becomes the only way a wounded person can remain connected to what they've lost. The gift is real. The cage is real. Both are true simultaneously. I came to understand something about this from the inside. My own practice of self-cure resembled George's, though for different reasons. I was recruited by overwhelmed parents to save a troubled younger brother, and I learned early that being for others was the price of belonging. Years ago, I said to George, "I'll give you $1 million if you can get the boulder off of me." The boulder was the crushing weight of pathologically accommodating and being for others in a way that left me out entirely. George helped me get the boulder off of me. And then, in ways neither of us planned or understood, I began to try to do something for him. I wrote a psychobiography of George. In doing so, something unexpected happened. The project moved in two directions at once. As I looked more closely at his life, I began to see my own more clearly, my own tendency to care for others while neglecting myself, my own version of the cage. And as that became clearer, something else came into focus. The subtle ways George's extraordinary empathy and devotion had sometimes left him out of his own story. His profound attunement to me, the way he had genuinely seen and accompanied me across decades, had itself opened a glimpse of the depths of his own quiet self-imprisonment. In being fully present to my wound, he had inadvertently revealed the contours of his own. So the psychobiography became something more than scholarship. It became an attempt to see him fully, honestly, without flinching, the way he had seen others for 50 years. To be for once Virgil to his Dante. When I read him what I had written, including the words, "This is a heartfelt way of saying thank you for saving my life," he said, "I am speechless, blown away, deeply moved. I feel understood in a way that goes beyond my own self-understanding. The unseen boy was finally seen. And in that moment, something completed itself. The wound that had driven 50 years of extraordinary work, leaving no one behind, had finally come full circle. George received what he had spent his life giving, and neither of us, I believe, was left behind. This is what hope looks like when it's not a feeling but a practice, lived out between two people across time, imperfectly and honestly, until something that was broken begins to mend. Anton Chekhov's pathway to hope looks very different than Baldwin's or Atwood's. It's quieter, less dramatic on the surface, but no less demanding. Chekhov grew up in a household marked by fear, humiliation, and constraint. His father was authoritarian, rigid, and often harsh. The family lived under constant financial pressure, and when the business collapsed, they fled to Moscow to escape debtor's prison, leaving the 16-year-old Anton behind to finish school alone and support himself. He later described his childhood with a single phrase, that of a, quote, little convict. That phrase matters. It tells us something about the emotional atmosphere in which he was formed, an atmosphere of control, fear, and diminished freedom. And yet, Chekhov did not simply repeat what he had known. Years later, in a letter, he described the central task of his life in a way that became justly famous. He was engaged, he said, in squeezing the slave out of himself drop by drop. That is Chekhov's version of hope. Not a sudden transformation, not a heroic breakthrough, but a patient, lifelong effort to free himself from the internalized effects of domination. What did that look like in practice? It meant first a commitment to see clearly. Chekhov distrusted grand theories, moralizing abstractions, and easy judgments. He refused to reduce people to types, villains, heroes, victims, fools. Instead, he attended to the particular, to the small, often contradictory truths of human lives. In his stories, people are weak, vain, self-deceiving, kind, petty, longing, confused, all at once. He does not excuse cruelty, but he does not turn it into occasion for harsh judgment. This is what I would call clear seeing without contempt, the capacity to encounter human beings as they are, without idealizing them and without turning against them. He could see failure without scorning the person who failed. He could see illusion without mocking the one who needed it. He could see suffering without turning away from it. Second, Chekhov's transformation took the form of benevolence in action. He was not only a writer, he was a physician, and he practiced medicine among the poor, often without payment. He built schools, he organized relief efforts during famine and epidemic. He traveled to the penal colony on Sakhalin Island at great personal cost to document the suffering of prisoners the rest of Russia preferred not to see. This is crucial. Chekhov did not respond to suffering with theory. He responded with attention and care, not sentimentality, not moral superiority, but concrete acts that reduced suffering where he could. Third, and most importantly, Chekhov refused to make degradation the grammar of his inner life. He had known humiliation. He had lived under domination. He had experienced instability and isolation, but he did not turn these experiences into bitterness. He did not organize his identity around grievance. He did not reproduce in his own way of seeing the harshness that had shaped him. Instead, he developed a stance towards life that it was once deeply realistic and quietly humane. Chekhov shows us a form of hope that's easy to overlook because it's not dramatic. It's not the hope of triumph. It's not the hope of overcoming the world. It's the hope of becoming, over time, a person who does not pass cruelty on, who sees clearly and acts where she or he can, and who refuses to let the injuries of the past determine the quality of one's presence to others. If Baldwin shows us how to confront injustice without hatred, and Atwood shows us how to accompany others into the depths of suffering without abandoning them, Chekhov shows us something equally essential: how to live day by day without becoming shaped by the very forces that once diminished us. That too is a way of breaking the cycle of violence. And like the others, it's not a gift, it is a practice. Baldwin, Chekhov, and Atwood did not find hope by escaping what wounded them. They found it by going through it. Baldwin defeated the world's intentions for him, not by hardening against them, but by transforming humiliation into witness and witness into a fierce, unsentimental love. Chekhov, left alone at 16, did not make abandonment the center of his life. He became instead a man who looked at the world with serene humanity and spent his life building schools, healing the poor, and refusing to pass cruelty on. Atwood descended into the darkest recesses of human experience, psychosis, annihilation, despair, and came back not destroyed, but more deeply committed to what he called the healing of the human soul. Three different paths, one shared capacity: to transform suffering rather than transmit it. Few people want to be Virgil anymore, to go into hell with Dante, but the willingness to accompany another human being into the reality of their experience, no matter how painful, is indispensable in healing the emotional afflictions that haunt us. And when that kind of understanding is present, suffering that might otherwise be passed on can instead be transformed. This is not a small thing. It may be the most important thing. And it is available to us, not because it's easy, but because others have done it, not because pain disappears, but because it can be used. Courage, empathy, and love may be three other words for hope. Courage, empathy, and love may be three other words for hope. The forms of courage, empathy, and love Baldwin, Atwood, and Chekhov embody: refusing hatred, entering suffering, transforming inherited degradation. These are enduring inspirations and pointers towards where hope might live for us as we navigate a world of violence and sadism, and yes, unextinguishable empathy, courage, and love. Baldwin knew this. He wrote, "Not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And in the Amen Corner, a play Baldwin wrote, he gave these words to a character and then spent his life living them. Don't try to get away from the things that hurt you. You got to learn to live with those things. Use them. Thank you.